Today I wanted to do something a little bit different since the new Zelda Tears of the Kingdom is out and everyone's talking about it. I had this idea for going back to where it all started. The original Legend of Zelda for the Nintendo was one of the most important games to me, at least. Um, I grew up with this game, and it was one of the first that showed me that video games could be more involved, I suppose. It had a huge, at the time, world, um, mysteries and things to find and explore. And I would spend all day poring over magazines and making theories and making maps and trying to figure out strategies for getting through the maps and finding things. It was a great time. I played this with my brother and my father, and we all bonded over it. So I have always had a special place in my heart for this original game. I have my own copy from childhood still, and it retains my save game and my brother's save game from that time. Um, in fact, I recently replaced the battery in that cartridge and maintained the saves by dumping them off and storing them back. So that one is special and always will be. But I found a listing on, I believe it was eBay, doesn't matter, but though, for a original NES gold cartridge that was listed as not working and damaged. Not really sure what about it caught my fancy exactly, but I said, well, I want to see if I can make it work. Why not? So I ordered it, and it came wrapped in a lovely note. Made me really think that the person who had owned it cared about the game. Maybe not to the degree I did, but some. They wished me the best in getting it to work. It wasn't even typed; it was handwritten. And this is that cartridge. Now, it's in generally pretty good shape, and the problems with it working were not major problems at all. I was able to open it up, check it out. The internals look pretty good. It needed a new battery, but no surprise after all this time. I haven't done the battery yet, but I got the PCB to work through just, cleaning. That's really all it needed. It was a really good clean. Um, it wasn't filthy, it was just well used. However, the case, as we'll see, has suffered some damage. Let me switch this so you can see the bigger. Now, as you can see, the PCB looks pretty good, right? It's still a little bit of scuffing down here, but short of using an abrasive like a brass cleaner or something to scrape off a layer, just for the sake of making it look cleaner, I think this is pretty good. I may come back at it with a pink eraser at some point just to see if I can get a little nicer, but this works perfectly now, every time, and that's really what we want. I'm not a huge fan of the abrasives if they're not necessary, because there's only so much you can scrape off over this over time without completely ruining the board. I need to replace the battery still, as I said, but that's trivial. But the case is the real problem. Now, I think, as you can see, it's generally in good shape. The label looks excellent. There's not really much chipping except a little bit of in the corners where, common wear areas you'd expect to wear off. But I think someone accidentally dropped it on the corner once, as you can see here. So for any other game, my approach to restoring this would be to, buy some sort of an aftermarket shell and replace the plastic, maybe get a reproduction label, depending. If it was just the back shell, I could just, and it was a gray cart, I could just replace that. No, not that big a deal, but in this case, it's, a gold Legend of Zelda, and I have to think these weren't exactly rare or anything. This was a very, very popular game. I think it's still not particularly rare, but each one that's lost is one fewer that exists. And at least for nostalgia purposes, I wanted to see if I could do something a little better for this. So I'm going to try a kind of restoration that I don't think I've seen done before. And it may not turn out well. There's always that possibility. We'll see. There are two problems I want to address here. First, this cover has something of a hairline crack there. I don't want to pull at it too much, but you can see it runs up here. This is not super noticeable if you don't mess with it. So what I want to try and do is see if I can just strengthen the plastic here to prevent it from breaking further or snapping off in the worst of cases. So I had an idea for this where I would take a strip of ABS plastic and see if I could bond it to the back here on the inside of the shell, strengthen it and prevent it from spreading like that. Of the two problems, I think that's going to be the easiest to address, and I feel like that will work the best. This is the tricky one. How do you fix this? I don't even have this piece. So, thought about it quite a bit. And this might not work out too well. But there are Etsy sellers who make pretty nice reproduction gold carts. And I have one of those here. The problem is nothing wrong with the quality of this. In fact, this looks probably better than Nintendo's effort, I think. And you can see they didn't cheap out even the inside. Unlike the original cart, even the inside on these is gold. So this is a very nice reproduction. I can leave the link to the Etsy store below. But how does this help? Well, there is a Japanese concept I've read about, and I'm going to butcher this pronunciation horribly, I'm sure, but I think it's called kitsugi or something like that. The idea is that for treasured objects, when you can repair them carefully, and rather than trying to hide the damage or the wear and tear and the indications of age, instead you almost draw attention to them, try to make them beautiful. I've always liked that concept, and I thought I might make at least an attempt to apply that here. The idea is going to be to see if I can take a corner of this case, cut it out, and place it here using a plastic epoxy. Obviously, that isn't going to come out seamlessly, and that's not the idea. It shouldn't. There will be, if I do it well, ideally, there will be some sort of a gap with like a caulk-looking epoxy area in here. I was thinking then, following the principle of beautifying that I was talking about, I would try, and I don't know how well this will come out, but I would try to take a metallic paint and paint the seam green, because green is a commonly paired color with the series these days. You can see my shirt. It is a nice forest green. I'm hoping it'll match well. This sort of arts and craftsy sort of thing is not my typical wheelhouse, and this may not turn out well, but hopefully, even if it's a disaster, it'll at least entertain you guys. What I've tried so far, because I'm not crazy enough to try any of this for the first time on the one cart I have, is I got a regular reproduction shell. This is just ABS plastic, nothing special about it at all. But because it's flat black plastic, I thought this was better as a test subject than this gold cart, which has the golden metallic plastic inside, since the properties of this do not match the original. And I've tried some of these techniques out. Over here. Here I've taken a slab of ABS and I've used a two-part epoxy, plastic epoxy, to bond the ABS to the shell material. And this is an extremely strong fit. This is not coming off. You can't even get it to budge. And better, it didn't warp or melt or anything to the outer shell. So while getting the piece I need to fit up to the edge here and around this post is going to be a challenge, I think with a Dremel I should be able to manage it. And I have a big sheet of ABS. I can leave a link for that too, to work with. So I think this part is quite solvable. It's fairly easy to work with. You just take a popsicle stick and spread the two-part epoxy on. You have plenty of time to work with it before it sets. The rest of the solution though is this corner. Now, this looks like an unholy mess, admittedly, but that's why I did this. This is an epoxy putty. It's also a two-part material that it's sort of like a silly putty or a Play-Doh at first. You have to mix it with your fingers, but it quickly becomes extremely tacky, sort of like marshmallow. If you've ever just mushed marshmallow for a while and your fingers stick together, that's one of the things I learned, and it makes it impossible to not get it on every single surface you touch. So I was trying to push it in from the outside to this. Well, what I did here, I broke off the corner I was thinking in a similar manner to my problem cart here, and I was going to try and reattach it. And so I was trying to hold it in place and mushing the epoxy into the corner, hoping to get just a bit of a seam to show here. But because I had to knead it with my fingers, I was holding the cart and it really got everywhere. So that's why I was doing the experiment this way. I learned a few things. First of all, I think I need to use some sort of tape to mask off the surfaces I don't want to get ruined, and also ideally mix with only one hand if possible. So the tape should ideally protect these surfaces and perhaps hold this corner into the proper position before I start. I need to use even less epoxy than I thought I would need to. And I further learned that if you get this on a surface you don't want it, it is very hard to get it off again. You would hope so because it bonds the plastic really strongly. That's the whole point. But I tried solvents and I tried scraping with metal and plastic tools, and all it does is leave scrape marks, and you can eventually get it off, but you're going to ruin whatever it is. So you really, while I think this approach can work, you really need to get it right the first time, and you need to mask it off carefully. So if I'm going to ruin the original case, this is the step that'll do it. This is going to be the hard part, definitely. Having said that, I think it holds quite strongly. I think this is a workable solution if you take the right precautions. And here I tried using my paint on it. I don't think that particularly looks great, but the color itself does at first. So this is going to take some further experimenting. I think I may need to lay a primer down and then put the paint, because the color itself, I think it'll do the trick. Even if I do it well, whether it'll look good or not can only be judged when I'm done, I suppose. But um, I'm hoping for the band I actually end up with here to be thinner, not a big blotch like that. So it'll look like a green outlined crack. I'm hoping that'll look kind of cool. Absolute worst case, I can get another one of these carts, give it a reproduction shell and original insides, and that's not the worst thing. It'll actually look nicer as a display piece that way. But for entertainment purposes, I will see about doing further experiments and see if I can end up with a nice restoration from this. It's about a day later, maybe 2 days. Who even keeps track of time anymore? Uh, but I wanted to give a progress update on how this cart work has been going on the Zelda Shell. Um, Here we have the front piece, which you may recall had the crack here that I wanted to strengthen. I think that went really well. I cut out a piece of the ABS to fit along the crack in the back. It went right along, very, very close to the corner. So I had to cut this pretty close and small, and then a custom little piece up here because the crack went all the way to the top. But the bonding and the epoxy worked really, really well. This is very, very strong and solid now. It left it for about a day to cure. And I think, other than a general cleanup, this front half of the shell is in very good shape. The trickier part, of course, was going to be that missing corner in the back piece. So I took my donor shell, and a little bit sad to have ruined it in this way, I guess, but it's for a good cause, I hope. And I cut that down to roughly fit in the shape of the crack. Mostly with, started with a Dremel to cut the gross shape, and then I used a combination of an X-Acto knife and flush cutters to very slowly whittle this into just the right shape to fit here. And it's fairly flush on both sides now. The harder part was bonding it. My original plan had been to use the plastic epoxy, like I don't know, like a putty, I guess, that to do the repair in the corner. But the two-part epoxy bonder worked so well on the front case that I thought I should maybe do that for the structural aspect of the rear case. So that's what I've done here. I have one piece that was custom cut around the features of the shell to bond the corner. There's another little one holding the edge. This is I mean, I wouldn't try and put a lot of force on this, but it's holding quite stably right now. I may or may not do another small piece up here. I'm not sure. But the remaining work is these little holes. Oh, and maybe, can you see the reason I ended up doing the bonding approach? Yeah, you can sort of see it here. There is another crack, as it turned out, on this part of the shell. And the epoxy putty wasn't going to do anything to strengthen that. So I used the same approach as the front with the ABS to strengthen that crack as well. And since I was doing that, it only made sense to use that same technique for the whole corner. But you can't really paint these remaining gaps, and I'm not that skilled with a X-Acto knife that I could have made it perfect. So the remaining challenge is going to be filling these cracks, probably with the epoxy, but trying to do it in a way that doesn't make a giant mess and ruin the whole thing. I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but we'll see how it goes, and I'll update you next time. So here I am, I think at the end of the road for the restoration of this original NES Zelda cartridge. Um, I want to show you the results, but first let's start with the basics. Does it work? I have here my retro AVS FPGA NES clone. It's just easier to deal with than a regular real NES. And we start the cartridge and voila, new battery installed. Game starts right up, works perfectly. Tested it earlier for a little bit for science, and test the battery. Everything's great. So that aside, let's talk about how the actual restoration came out. Take this aside. Get this out of the way. No matter where I put this flux container, it gets knocked over by everything I do. Okay. Oop, we don't need that on. So, how'd it come out? Well, still have some scuffing. I'm not really sure what the best way to address that is. If there is one, any kind of buffing I do is very likely to take off the coating, so I don't think that's a good idea. I did try cleaning it a few times. It got a little bit better, but I think this scuffing is just permanent. The crack here still has a crack, you can see, but it's very solid. As for the broken part, well, this fix itself is mechanically very solid. I don't know how well I can get that to focus, but the color of the reproduction card is not exact, but I think it works for this limited use. I keep going back and forth on whether the paint was a good idea or whether it came out well at all. I wasn't really picturing it when I started, but it sort of looks like the Zonai attaching effect in Tears of the Kingdom. Like I took a corner and used the Ultra Hand attach there just a little bit. I was hoping for something a little thinner, maybe shinier, more metallic. Maybe I could have used a better paint if I could have found a better paint. I don't know. I don't think it's terrible. But I'd like to hear your opinion. Was this worth doing? In terms of time, no, absolutely no way was this worth doing. It took a lot of time to do a lot of materials I didn't have to begin with, epoxies and the ABS plastic sheets, etc. Lots of carefully applying things, waiting for it to dry, cutting out the corner into a shape that fit perfectly from the existing shell, from the rather reproduction shell, was kind of time consuming. So absolutely not something I would recommend as a general kind of, let's say, restoration. It would make absolutely way more sense, and you'd have a nicer looking result if you just bought these very nice replacement shells, put some reproduction stickers on it, put the original PCB in those, and called it a day. But that doesn't mean this was without value. I think I learned a few things. How to bond broken plastic to at least give it strength with the ABS. I think that procedure worked really, really well and could be useful for another repair in the future. It's certainly a technique I'm going to keep in mind as an option. And, I don't regret having done it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like, is it worth trying to save an original shell And with this kind of effort, does this make it worse, do you think? Does it look so awful that you think I've actually made it worse than if I had done nothing? Do you have ideas for a better approach? Let me know in the comments if you have thoughts. But I think this project is done for now. So there you have it. Not every restoration is going to turn out brilliantly and perfect. As long as you learn something from it, I still think it's worth the attempt. These cartridges, these specific cartridges, are not going to get any more common. And I think in the worst case, I do have a good front to this now. I could take the front shell if I ever come across a different one with a broken front and a intact rear. I can make one fairly perfect cartridge out of that, so it is worth learning, having learned how to bond the cracks. But you know, these projects are as much for learning as anything, and I hope you learned something. I learned something, and let me know if you have any ideas or things you'd like me to try. Take care.